I've been excluded. I've been excluded on Oprah, you know.
On Oprah?
On Oprah, yeah, I've been excluded. Yeah, man.
This story doesn't begin with accusations. It begins with a warning. A quiet statement that didn't make headlines but should have. When Ice Cube said he wasn't part of the club, most people heard it and moved on. But in an industry where access is everything, refusing to be part of something invisible is a bold move. Because in Hollywood, there are structures that aren't written down, rules that aren't spoken out loud, and expectations that everyone understands without ever acknowledging them publicly. And then there's Oprah Winfrey, a name that represents influence at the highest level. For decades, Oprah has been seen as a cultural force, someone who shaped conversations, elevated voices, and built one of the most powerful platforms in media history. But power doesn't exist in isolation. It operates within networks, relationships, and systems that extend far beyond what the public sees. At the same time, the case of Jeffrey Epstein exposed something deeper. Not just individual wrongdoing, but a web of connections linking powerful figures across industries. And while being connected to someone doesn't imply guilt, it does raise important questions about proximity and influence. So when Ice Cube talks about gatekeepers, it forces us to ask something uncomfortable. Who controls access? Who decides which voices are amplified and which are ignored? And what happens when someone chooses not to play by those rules?
Ice Cube is taking names. One of the most influential rappers in history just lambasted platforms like The View and Oprah Winfrey for allegedly blacklisting him once he took a slight right turn in his political leanings. But that's only the start, because this conversation between Ice Cube and Tucker Carlson marks a confirmation of a deep distrust zone between the political sides, making even someone as popular as Ice Cube.
To understand why Ice Cube's perspective resonates, you have to look at his journey. He didn't rise through Hollywood by following its rules, he challenged them. From his early days with NWA, his voice was built on confronting authority, not aligning with it. That reputation didn't disappear when he moved into film and business. If anything, it became stronger. Ice Cube built a career that didn't depend entirely on traditional industry approval. He wrote, produced, and starred in projects that succeeded because of audience connection, not gatekeeper validation. Films like Friday and Barbershop weren't just popular, they were culturally significant. They spoke directly to communities often overlooked by mainstream Hollywood. But independence comes with a trade-off. According to Cube, there were moments where doors didn't open the way they should have.
What platforms have banned you?
I've been, I tried to go on The View. They didn't have me on The View.
Why?
Well, a few of the guests just really didn't like where I was coming from, so.
Opportunities that seemed logical never materialized. Invitations that went to others somehow skipped him, even when he was central to the project. These aren't dramatic scandals. They're quieter than that. Subtle patterns that only become visible when they repeat over time. And that's what makes his commentary interesting. He isn't pointing at one event. He's describing a pattern. A system where participation seems to come with expectations, and stepping outside those expectations can shift how the industry responds to you. It's not about proving a conspiracy. It's about recognizing that influence exists, and understanding how it shapes who gets seen, who gets heard, and who doesn't.
Yeah, man.
I would think you'd be the person Oprah would want to promote. I mean, you grew up in South Central, you were successful at a young age, you have dignity, you say what you think. Like, I thought that was the goal.
Me too. I don't know what it is, but, several of my, I had a movie called Barbershop.
Oprah said, if I had children, I wouldn't have the success I have today. Wendy Williams said, women who are married and who have children, it slows their momentum, it affects their career. When you hear those things, what do you think?
Monique on Oprah and
The idea of gatekeepers isn't unique to Hollywood, but it's especially visible there. In simple terms, gatekeepers are the people who control access to opportunity. They decide which projects get funding, which stories get promoted, and which voices are given a platform. And while that structure can help maintain quality, it also concentrates power in very few hands. Ice Cube's argument is that this concentration of power comes with unspoken rules. Not official contracts, but expectations. Align with certain narratives. Maintain certain relationships. Avoid challenging the system too directly. For those who follow these expectations, opportunities continue. For those who don't, the path becomes less predictable. Now, when we look at broader conversations about influence, the Epstein case becomes relevant. Not because it proves anything about unrelated individuals, but because it revealed how interconnected elite networks can be. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't powerful because of a single position. He was powerful because of who he knew. That's the part that changed public perception. People began to understand that influence isn't always visible. It exists behind the scenes in relationships, introductions, and shared spaces.
A casualty amid this raging culture war.
Where I can voice my opinion without somebody, saying I'm a bad person and that they never want to have me on their platform again.
What platforms have banned you?
I tried to go on The View.
So when audiences hear someone like Ice Cube talk about being outside the club, they're not just hearing frustration. They're hearing a perspective shaped by experience. And whether you agree with him or not, it raises a valid question. How much of success is talent, and how much of it is access?
Yeah, I remember.
That I wasn't invited to participate with the cast. I produced a show called Black White, and it was a very controversial show. And once again, they had the whole cast on, but I wasn't invited. And so I don't know.
On Oprah's show.
Yeah, so I don't know what that's really.
But Oprah's obviously a saintly, godlike figure who's revered by all decent people.
When discussing Oprah Winfrey, context is everything. She didn't just succeed in media, she redefined it. Her platform gave a voice to stories that mainstream television often ignored. She built trust with audiences over decades, becoming one of the most recognizable and respected figures in the world. But influence at that level comes with complexity. Oprah has interacted with countless public figures over the years: actors, politicians, activists, and business leaders. That's the nature of her position. It places her at the center of conversations, connections, and cultural moments. In recent years, as public scrutiny of elite networks has increased, those connections have been re-examined. Not necessarily because of wrongdoing, but because people are more aware of how power operates. When names appear in the same circles, audiences naturally start asking questions. The important distinction is this: association does not equal involvement. Being connected to someone, professionally or socially, doesn't imply participation in their actions. This is something investigators and journalists consistently emphasize. However, perception doesn't always follow that logic. In the digital age, narratives can form quickly, often based on incomplete information. And once a narrative gains momentum, it becomes difficult to separate fact from speculation. That's why it's important to approach stories like this carefully. Not to dismiss questions, but to ensure they're grounded in reality, not assumption. Because the difference between investigation and misinformation is clarity.
So, or a few of the hosts, So that's what I was told by the producers. I don't know if the producers was just copping out and using some of the hosts to not have me come on and explain myself, but I've been excluded. I've been excluded on Oprah.
On Oprah?
On Oprah, yeah, I've been excluded. Yeah, man.
Hollywood has always been an ecosystem built on relationships. From casting decisions to media appearances, connections often play a significant role in shaping careers. This isn't necessarily negative, it's how many industries operate. But when those relationships become too concentrated, they can create barriers for those outside the network. This is where Ice Cube's perspective intersects with a broader conversation. He's not alone in suggesting that independence can come with consequences. Over the years, multiple artists have described experiences where stepping outside expected norms changed how they were treated professionally. One of the most notable examples is Dave Chappelle, who walked away from a massive deal at the height of his career. At the time, his decision was widely misunderstood. Later, he explained it as a matter of control, choosing integrity over expectation. Stories like that challenge the traditional narrative of success. They suggest that access isn't just about talent or hard work. It's also about alignment, whether your voice fits within the framework the industry is comfortable promoting. And that's where the concept of gatekeeping becomes more than just a theory. It becomes a lived experience for those who feel they've encountered it. Not always obvious, not always provable, but noticeable enough to shape decisions. So when Ice Cube talks about being excluded, it's not about one missed opportunity. It's about a pattern that reflects a larger system, one that rewards participation and quietly sidelines those who choose a different path.
Now, Oprah Winfrey, who's in Australia at the moment, is facing backlash after she revealed she has gone no contact with certain family members. She has been accused of inappropriately framing the debate when tackling this topic on her podcast. Kinsey, she said people are now redefining what healthy boundaries look like in family dynamics. Did she explain why she's gone no contact and who she has made this call with?
The Epstein case changed how people view power networks. Before it became global news, the idea that individuals across industries could be connected through private relationships wasn't widely discussed. Afterward, it became impossible to ignore. What made the case significant wasn't just the crimes, it was the scope of connections. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities. People who, on the surface, had little in common, but were linked through shared circles. And while most of those connections were never tied to wrongdoing, their existence revealed something important. Influence often operates behind closed doors. It's built through introductions, events, and relationships that the public never sees. And once those connections are established, they can shape opportunities in ways that aren't immediately visible. This doesn't mean every network is harmful, but it does mean that access to those networks matters. It can open doors, or close them. That's the context in which Ice Cube's comments should be understood. He's not presenting evidence of a hidden conspiracy. He's describing a system where influence is concentrated, and where participation comes with expectations. And for those who choose not to participate, the outcome can be very different. Not necessarily dramatic, but noticeable. Fewer opportunities, less visibility, more resistance. It's a subtle shift, but an important one. Because in an industry built on exposure, even small changes in access can have a major impact on a career.
Right now.
Made it, baby. Once upon a time, you didn't like Oprah. Right. And I recently saw you on Oprah special. So how are y'all getting along? And have y'all spoke after this?
I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't have anything against Oprah.
You just called her a
I'm going to tell you why.
You named your dog Oprah, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. No. Every time she made a mention to hip-hop culture, it was something that was wrong with it. And it was my CD that was the largest debut in hip-hop album. Looking at it and you saying that everything that's wrong with our culture is why I'm a success. When I actually got a chance to talk to her, she was like, I never thought about it like that. She's not where she's at by accident.
Watch how
Public perception has changed dramatically in the last decade. Audiences are more skeptical, more willing to question authority, more aware that the stories they see are often shaped by those with the power to tell them. This shift has created a new dynamic. On one hand, it allows for greater transparency. On the other, it creates an environment where speculation can spread quickly, especially when it involves well-known figures. In the case of Oprah Winfrey, this shift means her influence is now viewed through a different lens. Not just as a media leader, but as someone operating within a broader network of relationships. And while those relationships are often professional, they can still become part of larger narratives. That's why it's important to stay grounded in verified information, to distinguish between documented facts and assumptions, to recognize patterns without forcing conclusions. Because once speculation replaces evidence, the conversation loses its value. It becomes noise instead of insight. And that doesn't help anyone, not the audience, not the subject, and not the credibility of the story itself. So the goal isn't to confirm a narrative. It's to understand the environment in which that narrative exists.
They didn't have me on The View.
Why?
Well, a few of the guests just really didn't like where I was coming from. So, or a few of the hosts, I mean. So that's what I was told by the producers. You know, I don't know if the producers was just copping out and using some of the hosts to not have me come on and explain myself.
I think I know when it all started, back when 2020 was the most heated year for race relations in
At its core, this story is about power, not individuals. It's about how influence operates in industries where visibility is currency, where access determines opportunity, and where relationships can shape outcomes in ways that aren't always obvious. Ice Cube's warning is significant because it comes from experience. He's been inside the system. He's seen how it works. And he's made a conscious decision to remain independent from it. That perspective doesn't make him right about everything, but it does make his observations worth considering. At the same time, it's important to avoid oversimplifying complex systems. Not every decision is controlled. Not every outcome is predetermined. There are countless variables that influence success. But acknowledging complexity doesn't mean ignoring patterns. It means examining them carefully, asking questions without jumping to conclusions, and understanding that influence can exist without being immediately visible. That balance is what separates meaningful investigation from speculation.
Millions of people, including Oprah, fell for this hoax. Buckle up because this is a wild story. In the early 90s, a 14-year-old boy named Anthony Godby Johnson wrote this harrowing memoir. In it, he described how he'd contracted AIDS and syphilis after being forced into prostitution by his parents. The book spread like wildfire, and Anthony was invited to tell his horrific story in a TV special hosted by...
So where does that leave us? With questions. And questions are powerful, because they drive awareness. They push conversations forward. They challenge assumptions. Ice Cube's message wasn't about exposing individuals. It was about understanding systems. Oprah's story isn't about controversy, it's about influence. And the Epstein case isn't just about one person, it's about how networks operate at the highest levels. When you put those elements together, you don't get a simple answer. You get a bigger picture. One that shows how power, access, and perception intersect in ways that aren't always obvious. And that's why...
Well, I had to do some research here. In her 2020 book, What Happened to You, Oprah revealed details from her childhood, and she says that her grandmother would whoop her over the smallest things. And she says that those experiences turned her into a people pleaser who battled with boundaries well into adulthood. I also know that she's, said that there's been some sexual assault in her history.
This conversation matters. Not because it proves anything, but because it encourages you to think critically, to look beyond headlines, to question narratives without accepting them blindly. If this video made you see things differently, even slightly, don't keep that to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe in the idea of gatekeepers? Or do you think it's just perception amplified by the internet? Because the real story isn't just what we've discussed today. It's how these conversations continue. And whether people are willing to keep asking questions, even when the answers aren't clear.